Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the ConTinual Comics Lair for our discussion of the Queer Erasure of the Joker. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. And we'll start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their interest in the Joker. Sumiko, will you start?
Hi, my name is Sumiko Saulson. I am a horror writer, Bram Stoker nominated horror writer, and I'm also a comic zine maker. And I have been a fan of Batman since I was a little kid. And I think that my interest in Joker really became a lot more after, well, first of all, I was in the 80s, so I did see the movie with Jack Nicholson. So there was that. But I think that in the comics, it was really with the Dark Knight where they had the future and they had a really much different kind of vibe. But I think that the Joker is a very relatable villain for me also because of mental illness and the many mental illness ties. And although we don't really want to be represented as the bad guys, there have been many portrayals, especially like with Heath Ledger, where you really connected with that for the Joker.
Okay, Marlena?
Hi, my name is Marlena Frank. I'm a young adult fantasy and horror author. I got into Batman comics when I was a kid, late 80s, early 90s. I ended up loving the Batman movie that came out with Michael Keaton, and also BTAS, Batman the Animated Series, came out around that time, and that just, also ignited my love of Batman, everything. So I've basically been a lifelong Batman fan.
Okay. And Kelley.
My name is Kelley Frank. I also go by Morbid Smile Art. I'm a former English professor turned horror author and artist. I have the Jack Nicholson Batman movie was the first PG-13 movie I was allowed to see in a theater, and what a way to start. And I've had a deep love for the Joker ever since. I like his kind of chaotic, like just I don't know. There's for someone who does struggle with mental illness, and also it identifies as queer. I found like there haven't been a whole lot of role models when I was growing up in the 80s, and not that he's a role model, but it was kind of nice to see someone just cut loose and say, I don't care, and sort of just a very rebellious figure. I always found him kind of a lot of fun. So he's probably still one of my favorite Batman characters.
Well, for those who are watching the panel, how do you define queer coding? And when did you first notice it applied to the Joker? Marlena, will you start?
Well, for queer coding, a lot of times, especially in the 50s, you had the Hays Codes going on where they were not allowed to portray explicitly queer LGBTQ plus characters in television or movies. So you got a lot of things that were kind of queer coded where somebody would have like a cane or something like that, and that would be used as a way to indicate the person's queerness. Unfortunately, they also required people who were portrayed as queer coded to also be a villain in that time period too. So I think a lot of that in like impacts the rest of how you see comic books and the Joker in particular. But I think back in the Adam West series is where you really saw the Joker, who seemed very queer-coded in that whole series. I think the episode where he and Batman are having a surf competition was the one that came to mind.
Kelley?
I think like for me, queer coding, yeah, exactly what Marlena said. And also, just to piggyback onto that, like if you're looking for an example of queer coding, that also happens a lot in cartoons. You have cartoons like Steven Universe that are more explicit, but for a lot of older cartoons, they were not allowed to show queer characters. And a lot of times, again, they had to be villains. So if you're looking for one that's more modern, Team Rocket Jesse and James are pretty queer coded, especially James. But again, they have to be defeated every single time. So for me, that's kind of the idea of where that comes from. For the Joker, I don't know. I see him. He's queer coded so often. BTAS, Batman the Animated Series, was one of the big ones for me. And also, I mean, even Jack Nicholson's Joker, like, he's not really interested in Alicia, the lady that he's with. She's more just somebody to win for his own vanity. He's more interested in showing off for himself and being obsessed with Batman. So it's just that's his thing. He's just constantly doing I mean, if you think back to like the Maltese Falcon, the classic one where the character's sort of like rolling his hands up and over his cane over and over again in a suggestive way, and it's, you know, that classic queer coding. I feel like the Joker does that all the time, like constantly. His character is doing that, to the point where some people might just say it's a villain trope, but not really. That's a lot of times that was done in the past by queer writers who could not see themselves in film any other way or in books.
Sumiko?
Yeah, so I think first, if I was explaining this to someone who didn't know what queer coding was, I would want to make sure they knew what coding was. So, as was stated earlier, there was a comic books code. And before the comic books code, people could do pretty much what they wanted, but it was a morality code that came into play. And as was explained, they made it so that you couldn't show a lot of things. And one of the things was being gay. And I'm going to say this. The reason you see a whole bunch of anthropomorphic animal cartoons from the 30s is because they didn't have the same rules and regulations for animals. So animals could portray sexuality, which humans were not allowed to do, which is why Bugs Bunny is a queer-coded character who is constantly showing up in drag, because Bugs Bunny was not a human being. It was okay to show drag queen, which was Bugs Bunny, on a regular basis, right? And you see coding a lot in Star Trek, because in Star Trek, they couldn't directly talk about certain types of racial issues. So for many, many years, they had different races represented by different, species in outer space. And so people will say stuff like that. Klingons are, some people consider the Klingons to be Russian coded, aka representing Russian people. And some people started looking at how much the makeups and the actors made them look like African Americans, and are like, these are Black coded characters, because they were using these characters to tell stories. Queer coded characters are characters that people are using to tell a story about the LGBTQ community, LGBTQIA plus community, without explicitly stating that a person is queer. Although a lot of times these stories get told over time, and eventually they become canon, aka they decide that this is really what's going on. For example, Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy were queer coded for a very long time before they finally actually just had them become a couple in the comics. Okay. I think oh gosh, is it Quicksilver? No, I think that's the name of the character. They had one of the Alpha Force characters that was queer coded, that actually came out as a gay man after many, many years, but then they wouldn't let him date. So there was a whole period where you couldn't have anyone gay. And then in the 80s, it slowly got to be where you could have people that were gay, but they weren't able to date. And then they didn't actually let them date until later. So when you see characters like Deadpool, who are very, very openly pansexual, what you have is a modern version of what you could never show. So the way that, Deadpool is an anti-hero, and not exactly a hero is actually Deadpool is the modern incarnation of all the queer coded characters in the past, where you see that he is not really a villain. He's just kind of not as clean cut. And he definitely is always flirting with boys, including flirting with other heroes. And I guess that's how I would probably explain it.
That's a really good way of doing it.
I think maybe it was North Star who was gay in Alpha Flight.
North Star, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was like, I'm gonna have to Google this. It was North Star, yeah. So they finally had him come out in like 1988. They were signaling it for so long before that, and then when he came out, they would not let him date.
Yeah, and a lot of times when they had these characters, they would also like. I was looking at some review of some comics from like the 80s and 90s, and they were just like, oh yeah, these characters came out as gay, but then they immediately got AIDS, and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's great. Thanks, guys. I think that's like, what is that? Wherever Snowflame shows up. Snowflame, the cocaine-powered supervillain. Sorry.
Well, there was a book that didn't last all that long, a Marvel book, and I remember it because I actually read it. I mostly read DC, but I do read some Marvel, and I happened to read this one because members of Alpha Flight were in it, and that was X-Force, and North Star was in that, and there was more. I don't, the book's been out of print for a couple of years now, so I don't really remember the specifics, but I remember that they were very open that North Star was in fact gay in the book. But I'd like to pick up on something that that Kelley said earlier, because it's I think we can all understand why a cane would be a substitute for other things on screen, but I'm interested to know what about Team Rocket was gay coding, and what about Cesar Romero's Joker was gay coding? For those of us who are not particularly observant and didn't notice that, could you elaborate on what led you to those comments?
Team Rocket, like James is always cross-dressing, to the point where in a censored episode, one that did not get brought over here to the US, he puts on a pair of fake breasts for a bikini contest. And basically James will do anything possible to be able to wear women's clothing and be able to portray as feminine. So, it's pretty canon that James is at least gender fluid, if nothing else. And Jessie is always with him, and she kind of underscores her femininity, and he amps up or downplays his masculinity, and so it's usually seen as like they're very queer coded because they can't have them be explicitly queer. But that's like a go-to cosplay for people who are in the LGBTQ community, is Jessie and James.
And then Cesar Romero's Joker.
Yeah, so in the episode I was talking about where he and Batman are having a surfing contest, Joker's actually in if I remember right, I think he's wearing swim trunks, and Batman is wearing his whole costume
over his outfit.
Yeah,
yeah. Put them over their outfit.
Over their outfit.
It's peak,
and it's peak camp. It's hilarious, and but that whole every time you see the Joker especially in the movie that they had with the Adam West series, you have in old comedy, you had the straight man and the funny guy, and Batman is the straight guy, and Joker's the funny guy. And that language used today, you kind of see that play out a lot in the old Adam West series. I can't really point to a particular thing with him other than his over-the-top portrayal of the Joker, just having a good time and eating up the scenery. Yeah, I think there's a lot there. Plus, he wears all these bright colors all the time compared to what Batman.
Oh, he's wearing pink in that one, pretty much, isn't he?
Yeah.
It's not even a purple.
Not even purple. I think
it's like magenta, a costume.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Marlena. I got confused between what you had said and what Kelley had said.
No, it's fine.
No, you're fine. I mean, in Arkham Asylum, Serious House on Serious Earth, the Joker is like literally grabs Batman's butt at one point. Like and then I think in the Snyder run recently, the Death of the Family, the Joker is like flirting with Batman constantly, talking about how they're romantically involved and all this stuff. And he throws a tantrum when Batman's going to marry Catwoman and all these things. Like it's there.
Well, I think there's a point in that same story by Scott Snyder, where the Joker makes a point of telling Nightwing he smells good.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Sumiko,
Neil Adams also. Huh? Oh no, I was just gonna say I think there's a Grant Morrison comic where Joker says he's there's a person who like pushes him up against a tree and he's like, oh, okay, if you're into it, that's great. I just so you know, I bought him from the top, and then so I mean, it's like it's here. It's obvious.
Sumiko, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think that it carried over even after. So I mean, I think that after a certain point, they did sort of like straight wash the Joker, like what you say in the movies and stuff like that. The ones with the ones in the 80s, but I think that Heath Ledger's the Batman that had Heath Ledger as Joker kind of made him more queer again, so they went back in that direction. But I think that because of his tragic death, and because he had been in Brokeback Mountain in close proximity to that, I think that they started straight washing the character again, sadly, unfortunately, after that.
Yeah, I mean that scene with where Heath Ledger and Aaron Eckhart as the Joker and Two-Face in that hospital scene, that's very sexually charged. That's
wearing a dress in that one.
Oh yeah, man, Joker popularized the dress. That's a thing though. You know, that's a tradition that goes way back in queer coding of using drag as comedy, but as a way of also doing drag. You know what I mean? But it's like, haha, it's not serious, but it is, you know, so you can get away with it.
Just on a side note that's not really relevant to the discussion, but I think it's cool, so I'm going to toss it in there. The first time I saw the Georgia Philharmonic perform at Dragon Con, there's apparently a tradition that the conductor wear a costume, and the conductor was dressed as the Joker for the first part, and then he left the stage where I think it was a quartet did a number without being conducted. And when he came back on the stage, he was dressed as the Joker as the nurse, which brought the house down. I mean, this is Dragon Con we're talking about. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, I found an article, and Kelley referenced it to refer me to it as well, by Hannah Collins on the CBR website. And I will, when the panel posts, I will put the link to the article in the comments so that people who want to can see it. But the link is https://www.cbr.com/joker-queer-straight/. So you can write it down now, or you can click on it in the comments. But one of the things that she says, she points out that the Joker in The Killing Joke actually had a wife, and that he showed interest in Harley. And then she says, taking the character's entire history into account, with emphasis on entire, different readings could either see a troubled portrait of a closeted gay man feigning an interest in heterosexuality, or someone who is openly bisexual, pansexual, or sexually fluid. Looking at the character's history, do you agree or disagree? Kelley, what do you think?
I mean, I think the Joker can be seen as sexually fluid. I think the beauty of literary analysis, and I come from an academic background, so for me, like, comic books are literature, just like any other type of text. And looking at it from that point of view, like any kind of literary analysis, like allows you to look at it from a different perspective that you might not be comfortable with normally, or that might not occur to you. And in this case, for me, it would be like doing a queer reading on it. And I think honestly, like, if I had to say, like, yeah, reading the Joker as in either way would be perfectly valid. What wouldn't be valid is to say that neither of those are okay. You know what I mean? Or to say that just one is preferable over the other, because we don't have nobody's interpretation of literature is, unless it has no basis in fact, or evidence from the text, then, I mean, that should be that it should be valid. So I personally see the Joker as more gender fluid, and pansexual, and at least bi. So yeah, I mean, it just seems like it makes sense.
Okay. Sumiko?
I think that even with like real life people have these kinds of back and forth arguments. I think Freddie Mercury is a really good example. He said that he was bisexual repeatedly, and continued to date women throughout the course of his life, even after he came out as being preferentially attracted to men. But I think that for political reasons, people might view someone that's predominantly attracted to men as gay or bi, depending on how they decide to skew it. And I will say that there's also, I do want to talk about bisexual erasure, because that's a real thing. So bisexual erasure is something that both straight people and, gay people and lesbian people engage in. And it is this idea that bisexual people have to pick a side, and that bisexuality is a phase, and that eventually you will either settle into heterosexuality or homosexuality, and bisexuality isn't real. Those are reasons why it is important, as was stated, not to erase the perspective of people who want to talk about, the Joker as someone who could be a bi or a pan person, because that could be a narrative. Or he could be a closeted gay man. Certainly he could be a closeted gay man, but it is very important that we do not engage in a bisexual erasure, where the only thing that a man who dates both men and women could be is a closeted gay man, because that's not always the case. That said, for, during the period of time when the Joker was originally created, all gay men had to be closeted. So I think another argument that is valid is that the original Joker was indeed a closeted gay man, because at that time, all he could do is be in a closet. There was no way to be out. Being out wasn't a thing that would come for a really, 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 really long time. And when I say that Deadpool is sort of like the modern incarnation of what some of these characters could be if they existed now, what I mean is that we know that Deadpool is pan. It's not a secret. But with the other characters, we really have to guess. And any of these guesses are completely adequate. But I would say there have been different Jokers for different times, because they kept rewriting him, because he is indeed a fictional character. So some of the Jokers you see are, for whatever reason, seem like they might be straight or whatever. Yeah. And it may be possible that there's just more than one Joker that they have changed per generation because they're fictional.
Okay. Marlena?
Joker is Sumiko was kind of getting to that point of, like, Joker is an archetype character. He is able to fit into all sorts of different worlds and different types of incarnations. He's even been just a head in one comic book. But he also is, I think when I first read that comic book, The Killing Joke, it was considered an alternate universe comic when it came out back in the early 90s. And it was really shocking to see Joker in a marriage with a wife. because I had never seen that in the Jack Nicholson version and the Cesar Romero versions, all of that stuff in BTAS. It was really jarring to see him with a wife and a pregnant wife at that, and kind of portrayed as like this hardworking dude who just can't cut a break anywhere. It was a very interesting take, but it was considered an AU, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. They're surely not going to make this canon because of what happens in the comic book. And then it was so popular that DC decided to make it canon. And I think that was one of the first steps we see to Joker being kind of straightwashed. That was kind of the first big move for that. I forget who the writer was for that comic book, but
Ellen Moore.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very jarring to see that when I first read it. I was like, wow, that was intense, and that was really an interesting story, and I really liked it. But I had no idea they were going to make that a canon story. But DC does that when something gets really popular, even if it's an AU, they make it canon, and they just incorporate it for good or ill.
Yeah, and that ultimately gave us Oracle, and now the debate is about the erasure of Oracle, which is a whole panel in itself.
Yeah,
that's huge.
Yeah. So I also found an interview on the Comics Alliance website, and I'm not going to read the URL off because it's way too long to do that, but I will put it in the comments when the panel posts, with James Tynion IV in conjunction with the Flame Con, which I hadn't heard of, but I learned that it is a convention in New York that focuses on LGBTQIA+ creators. And so he was interviewed as part of this con. But one of the things he said really stood out to me. He said, superhero comics in particular, but comics of all shapes and sizes, tend to tell the stories of outsiders. Do you agree or disagree with that? And how do you see that quote as being applicable or not to the Joker? Sumiko, will you start?
Yeah, I mean, some superhero comics tell the stories of outsiders, but they definitely don't all tell the stories of outsiders. So I have some disagreement with the quote. I think like the X-Men definitely is telling the story of outsiders. But the Superman is telling the story of someone who has assimilated. So this is really an immigrant story of an immigrant who enters the United States and becomes a model citizen. So they tell all kinds of different stories, and they have all kinds of different narratives. And in some of them, the heroes are outcasts. And in some of them, the outcasts are villains and are being roundly and soundly vilified, while some very patriotic folks like Golden Age Captain America save the day.
Okay, Marlena?
Speaking of Superman, they came out with him being bisexual recently, so it's been really interesting to see how the comics community has been reacting to that. But I think that comics, I agree with Sumiko on that. They don't always tell the story of the outsider. I think the better ones tell the stories of the outsiders. I think it's a more engaging storyline whenever you get to see someone who's on the outskirts of society trying to make, a living somehow, whether that is, someone from another planet or someone with spider powers that, is trying to make a living with that, or someone like Batman who got, his life torn out from underneath him at a very young age, despite his privilege, can't find happiness. It's interesting to me to see the differences between stories about outsider characters compared to other comics where it doesn't feel like they're really outsiders. And it's just not as engaging, at least to me. But I just find that it's very interesting to make that broad statement, because I don't feel like every comic discusses outsiders or portrays them like that.
Okay. And what about the Joker within the context of that comment?
Well, I think Joker, again, he's an archetype character because he's so flexible for so many different kinds of worlds and interpretations. He can be an outsider. And a lot of times he is one, and he kind of should be, I think. If you're making the Joker not an outsider, and if he is, completely assimilated into society, which I've seen that done as a kind of flip on the Joker, where I think it was White Knight, that series.
Yeah, it's White Knight thing.
Yeah, I've seen that done well, where it's the jarringness comes from him being assimilated, and what does that mean for him as a character, and what does that mean for Batman? Because those two are invariably linked in comics. So, yeah, I think if you do it right, it can be very engaging, I guess.
Kelley?
It's interesting to me to see the idea of sorry, my coughing's going to happen. It's interesting to me to see the idea of that comics are always about outsiders, because like everybody said, I think there is a tendency sometimes to want to view, this aspirational idea of comics. I personally prefer things where it's about the outsiders, and I think that's part of why as a reader, I prefer stories about Batman's rogues gallery to stories about Batman and his family, I suppose. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of focus on, Joker had a comic that came out recently, and I read the first episode, and it was all about Jim Gordon. It was like Jim Gordon doing things, and what's Jim Gordon think of this, and what does he think about that? And I was just like, I'm not here for Jim Gordon. I don't want to read a book about the cops. I want to read about the Joker. And it was a very frustrating first issue for me as a fan of the character, because I know they're building it up, but Jim Gordon isn't exactly an outsider. He's like Commissioner Gordon, head of the police department in one of the biggest cities in the world. So it's like, that's not outsider material. I'm looking at the mentally ill on the fringes of society. So, and I think for the Joker, he and a lot of Batman's rogues gallery represent that. Some people have said that they're all aspects of Bruce Wayne's personality, but I think they're kind of more aspects of different types of reactions to an unjust society, reactions that maybe are harmful instead of helpful, that you can learn from. So for example, Poison Ivy is furious at, understandably, at the destruction of our environment. What does she decide to do about it? Murder a bunch of people. I mean, that's not really something we should do. So, but it doesn't mean we can't enjoy stories about her, but we also understand that she's going about it in a way that is flawed. And I think the Joker is kind of the same. He rages about things. He gets over the top and dramatic and angry about stuff. And if you were ever a theater kid, that's the Joker. He is theater kid gone horribly wrong. And I think that's a lot of fun. There's the old tradition of the court jester that was the one that told the king the bad news. And that was the jester's job, because then they would be able to, they were the only one that could break bad news without getting beheaded. And the Joker is the one that does that. He's the one that has to deliver all of the bad things in Batman's life. And that's kind of interesting to me. I don't know. I just like that about his character.
Okay. Well, before we move on to the Joker and Harley Quinn, does anybody want to add anything else to this? Okay. Joker and Harley Quinn. Kelley has an essay on her website about the debut of Harley Quinn in the Batman animated series. I think the top episode might have been called The Joker's Favor. And in that review, Kelley said something, it kind of touches on what we've already talked about, but I think it's kind of worth going back to it. There's plenty of debate about how exactly to categorize him, meaning the Joker, or if anyone should even try. But no one seriously thinks the Joker is a straight up heterosexual. And from the gist of the article, Kelley, I got the impression, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, that you see the introduction of Harley Quinn as the beginning of the straightwashing of the Joker. Is that correct or not? And how do you see Harley joining the Joker's life?
I do, and I see it as kind of accidental. It's interesting because the Joker has a long tradition of being a queer character. And then we introduce Harley, and they seem like they have a heterosexual relationship. And then and they're trying to portray them as straight. And even the Joker not being interested in her, but he's okay with her sometimes. You know, they have like a weird thing. But you get the impression that they do have a sexual relationship. And then over time, as Harley, as we get Poison Ivy introduced, and then we start to have like the really cool relationship that develops between those two, Joker becomes pushed into being like the angry straight boyfriend that doesn't understand why his girlfriend is suddenly into ladies. And I feel like we shouldn't have to push one character's queerness aside to justify the queerness of another character. That's kind of the essence of how it seems like, and it feels like the Harley Quinn comics. They had some of not the Harley Quinn comics, but some of the other comics that have tried to handle Harley have done really weird things with that relationship. And sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's just awkward.
Okay. Sumiko, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say that I think that the straight washing escalated certainly, but I think it was definitely present before 1992. I would argue that Jack Nicholson's Joker, although not entirely straight washed, was substantially straight washed. So yeah, I think that it started earlier.
Okay. Marlena, do you have anything to add?
It's really interesting to me to see how Joker's character changed whenever they wanted to have that, relationship triangle of Harley, Ivy, and Joker, because they wanted that fighting over Harley. And Harley's a very cool character. I don't see why she has to be in this abusive relationship with the Joker to prove that she's a cool character. I don't think that's necessary. But it's really strange how the Joker went from kind of this character, this villain who has a good time destroying things and doing horrible things to people, becomes abusive boyfriend in the media. And that's kind of where the storyline revolves around, is the abusive boyfriend and Harley, sticking it to him. It's weird because that's neither one of their characters. It feels very off for both of how their original form of their characters used to be. So I don't know. I'm not a fan of it, obviously, but I see how it got here. I see where it came from, and I hope that things like evolve separately from this, because it feels like that Harley's been in this state of bashing her ex for probably like a decade at this point, within comics and movies and the cartoon series and stuff. I feel like it's almost pandering at some point, where it's like, yay, girl power, but not in a constructive way. I don't know. I'm just not a fan of it.
Well, one of the things that we said before the panel started that we were going to talk about is the love triangle between Joker, Harley Quinn, and Poison Ivy. And this seems like maybe a good place to talk about that. Sumiko, you suggested that. So will you start us off?
Yeah, so I think that Harley Quinn started out as the Joker's psychiatrist, and their whole relationship trajectory is really a kind of broad stroke commentary on mental illness. Because I think that with mental illness, a lot of times, although women are more likely to be diagnosed with a mental health problem than men, and men are more likely to have undiagnosed mental health problems, this usually the women get treated like they're crazy and the men don't. And you just see this over and over and over again with the Joker and Harley Quinn. They have this very obsessive, super toxic romance where he tries to get her to become more insane, right?
Mhm.
Now, while this is happening, it's on the backdrop of all of this straight washing, because they're turning him into a stereotypical macho, very messed up dude. But I also think that if you take a little bit of a different look at this and how that works, and I know I'm talking about the previous subject, but now I'm back at it, right?
Mhm.
When he brings her over to the dark side, she starts wearing bright colors. She starts being more colorful. She starts being queerer. He makes her more queer. So now you've got a different type of story with something that I, being a member of the kink community, see a lot, which is you have somebody and they go to take a bit of a walk on the wild side in the kink community, and sometimes they meet somebody like, let's consider like Joker to be like maybe a really crappy dominant that Harley Quinn got a relationship with. And this happens, and all this is happening. Okay. I'm saying that now they are actually both still queer coded villains. And when she starts getting involved with Poison Ivy, they are now pulling her out as someone who can be openly queer and leaving him behind. Why are they leaving him behind? Probably for the same reason that they just finally took it off the books, a regulation where gay men couldn't donate blood because of HIV. It's because same-sex relationships between men are more vilified than same-sex relationships between women.
Yep.
Okay. So rather than having him come out as queer, they have Harley Quinn coming out as his proxy and getting in a relationship with Poison Ivy as an openly queer person. The relationship with Poison Ivy doesn't really last in that form in the comics. It becomes a way for her to escape an abusive relationship that she's in. And one thing that I think is super cute is that she gives an antidote that is Poison Ivy. She gives an antidote to her own toxins to Harley Quinn. So she's still toxic. She's just not toxic to her girlfriend, which is clever and that's cute. So I would say that they have now queer coded all three of these villains. They're still villains, and they're up against Batman, who is a whole other thing. And what this means is that we really have not actually gotten that far from back when they just wouldn't show us at all. Now they're showing us. They're still not, I mean, they have some of us as heroes because Superman came out as bi. But those of us that are, there were two things that were being shown with these villains. One was that they were queer, but the other was the overall sort of idea of that if you were a perfectly clean, like as we come out of, you can't talk about queer people, we now get into there's the perfectly clean, really, really, really goody two shoes Superman type queer people that are like okay and safe. And then there are the other people who, when they do the same things that, straight people do, like go to a really wild bachelorette party, they're viewed as still very like villainous for doing the same things. And again, the one really glaring exception to that is Deadpool, who is an anti-hero who can still be not clean cut and openly queer. So those are my comments.
Okay. And also Tim Drake came out as bi in 2021. I can't remember what his code name is now. It's Robin or Red Robin or something like
Red
that.
Robin, I think so. Yeah.
Marlena, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Sumiko. Talking about, all three of them, being queer because of this. You know, you have the Joker bringing Harley in. She starts wearing bright colors, and Harley goes off to be with Ivy. And the natural progression of this, right, would be that Joker goes off with a guy, or, you know, explores other relationships. But I think they're terrified of portraying a gay couple or two men together in comics. It seems like that's something that they are really reluctant to do, or maybe they're trying to slowly warm their audience up to that point because of how, you know, how that works. But I really feel like that would be the natural progression, and if you're looking at Joker as an actual character, instead of turning him into basically a monstrous, you know, taking away his humanity in a lot of ways, which is what they do to make him more of a villain a lot, because that's what they do in comic books. But I think especially with Harley having him as an ex, they don't want to look at him as being, you know, more of a human kind of character. They're trying to other him. So they want to keep keep him as a villain to her in that situation. If he goes off and gets another relationship, and it's really weird because they've had comics where he's had like replacement Harley Quinns and things like that, instead of clearly being either, like with Punchline and stuff, instead of embracing him being, you know, pan or gay or, you know, whatever they want him to be, they would rather bring in another Harley Quinn than do that. And the fans hated Punchline. That was something that I don't think she had many fans at all, from what I saw in the basic social media threads I was looking at. But they would rather bring in another straight couple for him rather than explore his queerness, which I think is very sad. They're still trying to fit him into that box, man.
Hey, Kelley?
Sumiko, Marlena, you guys are, you both are exactly on point with that. Like, I feel like at this point, Harley is one of the best selling brand characters they have. And I think she sells, if I have to name like another female villain that sells well, I really can't name one in terms of their marketability and the toys and all this kind of stuff. Wonder Woman is there, but she kind of appeals to an older crowd. Harley is like one of their big top sellers along with Batman right now. And so they're just trying to pump out as much with her as they can. And I kind of feel like a lot of her character development is getting kind of smattered all over the place. I feel like we're going to start seeing more of a focus in on her character. I feel like we're getting close to like someone's going to come in and do some real big like reboot, and you're going to get some really cool in-depth like Harley getting with Joker and then moving on into her relationship with Poison Ivy, and then you see Joker grow, and we're going to see that. But I think it's going to be probably at least like 5 years, maybe 10 before we see something like that, because we just don't have a whole lot of queer creators in comics right now. And I think like having those, I think this isn't even an issue that DC's even really like paying attention to. Like Sumiko was saying, like it's more, you know, it's sexier for them to have a lesbian couple than it is to have, you know, a gay couple. I was trying to think of, I was trying to think of other rogues besides Ivy and Harley in Batman's main rogues gallery that are queer, like openly queer. And the only one I can think of is the Riddler, because he was canonically bisexual. But then when they did their Pride comic recently, they didn't include a comic with him in it, which was weird. And I looked on their website recently, and it doesn't say he's bisexual anymore. So I'm like, so is he still or not?
Yeah.
But Riddler always gets punched around too. So that tells you how they treat openly bisexual male characters in comics sometimes too, if they're a villain. So not really sure how that would go for the Joker in that case. I think it's easier for them to keep him closeted, just because of marketability. It's cynical, I know, but
Well,
I think in Gotham, I think in the TV show Gotham, that the Penguin was queer coded.
yeah, he was. They tried to go actually. So this is fun. Like Robin Lord Taylor, he and I forget the guy that played the Riddler, but they wanted to go all the way with that, and the show would not. They got all the way into a romantic moment, and then the show cut it off, and then that was the end. So it basically ended with full on queer baiting by that point. It was very sad, but they tried. The actors tried.
for those
And
who are not familiar with the term queer baiting, would you define that, please?
Queer baiting is when they, it's sort of like, remember what we were saying about queer coded? It's not that exactly. It's when they make you think a character might be queer, but they're not really queer, to get queer audiences to pay attention to the character. So it's kind of like a sort of pandering where they're trying to get credit from the audience, but then the character is not actually queer at all.
Yeah, so it's like clickbaiting, but using queerness.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like will they, won't they, and then I think Good Omens has been accused of that a little bit with Aziraphale and Crowley. So stuff like that, where it's like basically they don't want to commit because it would make audiences uncomfortable if they're not comfortable seeing queer characters on screen. So
yeah, I think
no, go ahead, Sumiko.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, I think that they had some other queer coded villains in Batman. I think that Jim Carrey's Riddler was super queer.
Oh yeah,
so gay. And so like hot for Batman. It's almost like they took the old Joker from the comics, from the early comics, and put that all on him.
Yeah.
And I think Danny DeVito's Penguin was definitely giving off a lot of queer coding, and also the Umbrella was taking the place of the cane.
Oh yeah.
Well, we are actually coming close on time. One of the things that we'd said we wanted to talk about was fridging Ree Harley. Sumiko, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah. So I think that the Joker tried to kill her a number of times, and in one comic, literally, I think caused her to miscarry, and some other like really horrible things. But fridging is when they kill, maim, or disable a female character in order to create character development for a male character. And she's a character that they did that with actually a lot. Unfortunately, the character development was ultimately developing the Joker into the form of incel Joker as played by Joaquin Phoenix in that movie. But there's a lot of fandom for that. So it as mentioned, Joker got really ugly, and a lot of people were talking about how they made him into a really unlikable person. But unfortunately, he became more likable for a certain set of guys. I'm sorry, I might have said something I shouldn't say on here. Yeah, just edit that part out then. Yeah, they tried to make him more likable by getting him to fridge her.
Yeah. Well, and
yeah, go ahead, Marlena. Did you?
I was just going to say, like with Barbara Gordon in The Killing Joke, that's what they did to her. She literally is disabled, and as a way of, like, he was trying to drive Jim Gordon mad in that one, which is really weird method, but yeah, so Barbara Gordon gets disabled because she's shot through the spine in that comic. And they decided to make that canon, and they were like, yeah, we're going to keep this. And, it was really great having Oracle as a character, but it was also like how they chose to get her there was very strange, that it felt like it was just kind of reactionary to what the audiences liked, and then they're like, okay, we're going to adopt this. Okay, we're going to make this a character. Okay, we're just going to roll with it, and instead of exploring ways all the time that she could be, I wanted to see more comics based around Oracle whenever she was in her wheelchair and stuff. And they didn't do many of those. She was still a background character a lot of times.
Yeah. I would really recommend that anyone who's interested in Barbara Gordon's transition to Oracle track down John Ostrander and Kim Yale's Batman Chronicles Volume 1, Issue number 5. It's one of the best character stories I've ever read in a comic book, and it's about how Barbara Gordon made herself into Oracle. Kelley, did you want to say anything else about Fridging and Harley?
I feel like Harley's character, I feel like one of the things that Joker is often a vehicle for refrigerating other characters doing the dirty work that the writers don't really know what to do. They're like, okay, well, we're gonna find some way to give Batman some trauma. Which Robin can we kill off, or which character can we kill off, or how many infants can the Joker kill in a room, or whatever. And it's just like, it gets kind of old. I've seen fans saying that they think like we need to have fewer Joker stories for a little while because the character's so overexposed and he's spread out so far. And I actually kind of agree with that as a Joker fan, because I feel like a lot of comics have kind of lost the essence of the fun of the character. We've gotten so far into grimdark that it's almost to the point of like, okay, but I want to enjoy all of these Batman villains have like a long history and they each have their own fandom, like people love these characters. And every time you have someone punch the Riddler in the face for laughs, or someone just crucifies the Scarecrow, which happened in a comic, or, throws Harley Quinn out of a window. There's a lot of fans that are very upset by that, because these aren't just like random whatever bad guys on the street. These are characters with a history that people often relate to. Often a lot of these people that relate to the Batman villains are themselves marginalized groups. And so I feel like it's problematic when you're constantly refrigerating characters like Harley, or you're having the Joker be this agent of the person that has to kill a woman in a room full of infants or something. That was something that happened too with, I forget, Jim Gordon's wife. He's had a few, but it's just, it feels like it's just a thing that just keeps going. And I'd like to see a more nuanced approach to dealing with these people with mental illness, instead of just they do the bad thing and then we punch them. And I don't know, superhero comics are going to have to catch up to some of the indie comics, I think, in that regard a little bit, because they're just not quite there yet.
Okay. Well, we are just about out of time, but is there anything that anybody else wants to talk about that we have not touched on? Okay, well then we will wrap it up. Everybody, please tell the viewers where they can find you and information about you and your work. And if you have a recent or upcoming release that you would like to highlight, this is the time. Sumiko, will you start?
So you can find me at www.sumikosaulson.com. You can also find my books at Dookie Zines, that's DOOKYZINES.com, and Mocha Memoirs Press. My most recent novel, Happiness and Other Diseases, is available on Mocha Memoirs Press and at bookstores everywhere. And my latest comic zine, And We Live Long Enough to Bury Our Dead, can be found at Dookie Zines. Thank you.
Marlena?
You can find my works at marlenafrank.com. My latest release is The Darkest Lullaby, which is a whole bunch of nannies having to take care of their spooky wards. That just came out this last Halloween. So, yep, you can find them all on my website.
Okay. Kelley?
You can find me at morbidsmile.com, or just look up Kelley M. Frank. The M helps. And I have a lot of art that's going up on sale pretty soon for the holidays. So pop on over there and check out my Etsy shop.
You can find me here on ConTinual. My website is nancynorthcott.com. That has information about books and idle ramblings. And my latest release is The King's Champion, the third volume of the Boar King's Honor historical fantasy trilogy. It's set in England, beginning with the Dunkirk evacuation and going through the Battle of Britain. So I'd also like to thank everyone on the panel for being here and joining in this discussion. Thank you to everyone who's viewing the panel. And thank you to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information about them, visit heroesonline.com.